Oh, welcome back, and let's have this conversation. And joining me in studio is the Acting Director, Kenya Meteorological Department, that is Peter Mbeje. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us.
Thank you.
And obviously, we would, looking at this conversation from the aspect of harnessing these two methods of weather forecasting to ensure this food security, just like Simon Achola has done from that particular story. But let's begin from this. When you talk about, traditional weather forecasting, there's always this feeling, and it's a general feeling for that matter, that traditional weather forecasting was much more based on superstitions as opposed to science.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
Small correction, I'm actually the director of Kenya Med Department.
All right.
Not the acting director.
Okay.
But yeah, when you look at some of the methods that I used, then you realize probably there's a bit of superstition. When you hear people slaughtering goats and so on and so forth, you realize or you think that there's a lot of superstition.
Yeah.
But we have worked with what we are calling the traditional weather forecasters in a number of areas. And when you talk to them and see what they go through, then you realize there's a lot of science in what they do.
Yeah.
So maybe I can just give you an example that plants and animals and even insects tend to react to rapid changes in weather patterns, like the humidity levels. And these are some of the things that the traditional forecasters depend on to generate their forecasts. One of the things we have realized that they are very good at giving you the short-range forecasts. How is it going to be the next 1, 2, 3 days? But they might not be able to give you the long-range forecast, like, for example, a whole season, like the long-range season. But like I said, there's a lot of science in it. Using animals, plants, reactions of animals, plants, and even insects on changes in humidity, for example.
Absolutely. But if you were to draw parallels between the traditional methods of weather forecasting and the modern weather forecasting, what would you say about both?
Well, like I said, the traditional ones are very good for the short-range forecast. We are talking about maybe one day up to about 7 days or so. In science, you can do projections up to 1 year ahead. For Kenya, for example, we do projections for the main rains for seasons just 1 month before. Those are in March, April, May, June, July, August, Western Kenya, and also the October, November, December, the short rains. The way to harness both, maybe I can talk about that. The way to harness both is to make sure the two institutions work together. The traditional weather forecasters are respected in their areas of operations. And you can take advantage and utilize them for, also getting into the understanding of what they do, and also making sure that now your information gets to the people as well. It's like you are collaboratively engaging to generate a forecast that is now disseminated to the communities for usage. We've dealt with a number, like I said, and probably I'll give you an example of what we've done in Western Kenya.
Looking at the same, because you talk about modernity and as well as traditional methods and how they can be harnessed. But then the question is, because almost every other time, the weatherman, where you come from, tells us it is going to rain for this entire week, but then it doesn't rain. But yet we are told with the modernity and the use of technology to predict weather, it ought to be one of the most accurate. Where is the disconnect here?
There is no disconnect. I can tell you that from our own assessments, the fact that we say it's going to rain and it doesn't rain is an attitude in people's minds, because we've done assessment on a daily basis.
All right.
When we have given a forecast for tomorrow, for example, come tomorrow, we'll check the observations and check against the forecast that we've done. When we've done a forecast for a whole week, we'll do the assessment, in fact, on a daily basis, and see how it's evolving. When you've done a forecast for a whole month or even a whole season on a daily basis, every 5 days, every 7 days, we assess and see whether it's going as per the projections. So there have been attitudes, and probably it was because the weather was a bit stable in the earlier years before issues of climate change. But with climate change, I think the variability has become quite significant. People are not doing things the way they used to do, because you remember that in the 80s, in the 70s, 60s, people knew by the 15th of March the long rains would be starting, but that's not the case nowadays. There's a lot of variability, and therefore you have to depend on the focus that we give to plan your activities in agriculture, for example. And that's why more and more people are now understanding the importance of weather and climate, and probably thinking that it's now becoming more accurate than it used to be. But for our own case, we know that, of course, this is a science. It has been evolving. We have been making certain improvements, but the accuracy has been quite good all through.
All right. The availability or unavailability of weather data from where you see it, how does it affect weather forecasting, particularly when we talk about modern weather forecasting?
Modern or otherwise, let me talk about the science.
Yes.
Without data, you cannot do much. Without the observations, you can't do much. It's like when you visit a hospital, the doctor will first of all ask you, how are you feeling, to establish what is going on at that particular time, because that is what he uses now to make a projection. For us, to do a forecast for Kenya, for example, we need information not just from Kenya alone, from all over the world, by the way. And there's a very, very effective global dissemination system called the Global Telecommunication System, through which data that's observed all over the globe comes into a specific center for use in forecasting. So data is very key. The more you have, the better the output. And that's why in Kenya we've been trying to improve our station network in terms of the numbers, to make sure that we have an adequate network that can assist us improve our focus as much as possible.
Let's talk about the agenda on food security, and of course, today being about harnessing both ways to ensure that we achieve food security. But then, like you pointed out, traditional methods, and the seasons they knew they were supposed to plant are not the same when you talk about the years we are living in. But still, you will still find farmers who still want to plant around that time because they still believe that they can, the season will still, go back to the same as was in the old season. So how do we harness to ensure that we have food security in Kenya, both methods?
One thing, like I said, the traditional forecasters are people who are well respected in their communities, and we can, take advantage and make sure that we utilize them to disseminate information, because their word is respected as much as a word from any administration, for example. So the best is really to embed the two. Talk to the traditional forecasters, look at what they have as their forecast, have your own, discuss and say, this is the consensus forecast that we are going to disseminate. And then you can go together and disseminate to the end users. Like you said, things are not the way they were in the 80s. Like I said at the beginning, the variability is quite high right now. And therefore, that is why using early warning information that we generate is very key in planning your activities in agriculture. What time do you plow, for example, to prepare your land? What time do you plant? What time do you, for example, spray and so on and so forth? That information is available that you can utilize, because apart from giving the seasonal forecast that assists you to plan, it's like we're telling you on your marks when we give the seasonal forecast for March, April, May, at the beginning of April. That's when we normally provide the information. You now know that in such and such areas, these are the kind of rainfall patterns that you're expecting. And based on that, you can plan on what type of crops to plant, for example, in liaison with the Minister of Agriculture, because they have the information. And once you do that, if you utilize the daily, 5-day, and 7-day forecast that we generate, you can plan your activities accordingly in terms of your what you're going to do to your crops.
I would imagine a situation where, and there has been little emphasis, particularly from media houses, if you were to say so, on weather forecasting, other than, when already you're predicting doom, either in terms of so much rain that will come, or when the sun is coming, in what you would say, scorching sun that would be coming. That is what the emphasis from the media has been. So I would assume this critical information on when farmers can spray their crops, or when they should be planting, or let's say 30 or 300 millimeters of rain that is going maybe to be in Murang'a or Kakamega, is not information that reaches the farmer every other day. What are you doing from your end to ensure that this critical information that a farmer needs before they engage in the act of farming is able to get to them in time and is beneficial?
Apparently, that information gets the farmers on time.
It does?
It does. Like I said, we generate the seasonal forecast, say for March, April, May in April. we have 47 counties. In each and every county, you have a county director of meteorological services. Okay? Once we have done the national forecast, they take that and downscale to the county level. And they have what they call the participatory scenario planning activities, where they bring the stakeholders on board to look at the forecast and utilize that to develop what they call the contingency plans on different sectors. This is the kind of forecast we are expecting from Murang'a, for example. Yeah. What kind of agricultural activities are appropriate? So that information gets the farmers. And I can tell you that anytime we delay to generate information and start getting calls, that will tell you that people are really utilizing this information. So it gets out there. It might not be coming to the media houses that this is what the people are doing, but the truth of the matter is that the information really goes to the farmers.
Absolutely.
On time.
But you also talked about perception, you know, as regards what people view the weatherman as vis-a-vis the situation on the ground, and you called it a perception. So I would ask, how are you able to manage perception? Particularly, let's say you've given this information to a farmer who then thinks, this is just the weatherman bluffing. Let's just wait and see what happens. How are you able to address these perception issues and ensure that farmers take advantage of the environment, or rather the weather as it is?
One of the things we do is awareness creation on the importance of utilizing weather and climate information for activities in agriculture and other sectors. That's very key. In other aspects, people reverse their perceptions once they have been impacted, and they realize that if we had utilized the information, probably I would not have been severely affected as such. So what I can say probably is that maybe climate change has had its own positive impacts on people realizing the importance of using weather and climate information. When it was stable those years, you know, forecast would be a forecast, but they knew by 15th I would be planting. But now the variability is quite high. So with climate change and the impacts associated, I think people have realized the importance of using weather and climate information in the activities, not just in agriculture alone, but even other sectors. So like I said, anytime we delay to generate a specific forecast, we start getting calls. That means people are reutilizing the information and they want to use it for their planning the activities accordingly.
In this season that we are in, already you've released the weather forecast. And obviously as we move into other seasons, as the year wears out, what would be your advice to farmers on what exactly should they plant? Obviously, you know, moving towards the agenda of food security, and because we are known to, you know, to plant maize, cassava, rice, and all these things. In a season like this one, when we seeing, you know, heavy rainfall in most parts of the country, what are the most, you know, what are the most probable crops to grow? And as we move towards, you know, September, November, December, what are the, you know, other probable plants to grow?
Our main jurisdiction is really to provide the early warning information in terms of how are we expecting the rainfall patterns to behave. If you work closely with the Minister of Agriculture, they will tell you that because of the patterns that have been projected, these are the appropriate crops to plant in which areas. But for example, if we anticipate deficient rainfall, say in the southeastern lowlands, people should go in for fast maturing, drought-resistant crops, for example, for purpose of food security. And the other thing is that now in Kenya, all of us are consuming ugali. So everybody wants to plant maize, even in areas that it cannot survive. Because maize requires certain rainfall
Obviously,
amounts.
that was leading me to the other question that I wanted to ask, because for the purpose of this conversation, we're talking about food security and weather patterns. And as you know, headed towards the conversation on maize, do you feel there's an unnecessary obsession, you know, with planting maize as opposed to other, you know, drought-resistant foods, and what can actually put this country, you know, in the areas of food security?
I think so, because like I said, there are areas that cannot support maize generation, and yet quite a number of people are planting. So you find you don't get sufficient rainfall, but people are still planting maize. The cows, of course, will benefit, but in terms of food security, I don't think we get enough out of it. And if you go back the 60s and 70s, you know that people used to plant drought-resistant crops like cassava, potatoes, and so on and so forth, so that anytime there's food insecurity, you now get back to utilizing those kind of drought-resistant crops. But Nowadays, I think you walk anywhere, maybe because of the land is shrinking, population pressure, and so on and so forth. Not so many people are still planting those kind of crops. But I can tell you that those are very important crops for addressing issues of food security, instead of just depending on maize alone.
All right. From your focus and from the different stations you have, and for the purposes, again, of enlightening Kenyans on the importance of, one, conserving the environment, but also being weather sensitive, what would you say are the natural or the human factors that have, what you would say, have disrupted weather forecasting?
Well, I think one of the big key issues is deforestation. It doesn't affect weather forecasting as such, but it affects the impacts that we see on the ground. In deforested areas, for example, if you have the kind of heavy rainfall that you are getting right now, what happens is that you get a lot of soil erosion, and that's the fertile soil. This is what goes into rivers for the coastal siltation. At the end of the day, you find they have broken their banks. So that's key. Issues of landslides, for example, in hilly areas. If you have heavy rainfall and the soils are loose, the end of the day is landslides, for example. So those are some of the impacts. And I think what people should also understand is that trees are very, very important sources of moisture that gets into the atmosphere through what we call evapotranspiration and forming clouds. You start deforesting, you leave the lands bare. Like I said, erosion becomes quite prominent, and also you reduce the amount of moisture that you're getting into the atmosphere for cloud formations, and therefore you end up with even areas that were high potential areas become semi-arid. So those are some of the impacts, especially in deforestation. As
we wind up, because I understand we've run out of time, tell us about government support. I know the government, obviously, for the food security agenda to succeed, there has to be a lot of investment on the areas of agriculture, but also on weather forecasting. Tell us about government support and investment on weather forecasting, and how, through what is channeled through you as the Kenya Meteorological Department, that is able to sprinkle down to traditional, weather forecasters, and how you're helping them as we wind up.
Mainly, the government is supporting us in terms of infrastructure. Like I said from the beginning, you need very good network to be able to do proper forecasts. You need systems that disseminate that information, the headquarters for processing and also sharing with other people. You need systems that you can use to process and generate the forecasts, and also dissemination channels. So the government has been very supportive. At the moment, within Vision 2030, we have a flagship project called modernization of meteorological services, through which the government has been buying also modern equipment like automatic weather stations. At the moment, they have bought about 72 of them that's spread all over the country, and they also want to give us information every 10 minutes to the headquarters. So that's a very good investment. But just to wind up with, in terms of how we relate to traditional forecasters, I can quickly say that we have worked with the traditional forecasters in Bunyore, the Nganye family, and through that we have put up a climate information center within their locality, and there's also a community radio station that they use to disseminate climate information to the community that is used for mitigating any impacts of the extremes.
All right. So there's a trickle-down effect.
There's a trickle-down effect.
All right. Thank you very much, Peter Ambeje, the Director of Kenya Meteorological Department. And thank you again for your time and your conversation. And again, the contribution to this whole conversation, very much appreciated. But of course, the food security agenda is something we'll continue talking about and touching on almost on a very daily basis, because these are the things that are at the heart of Kenyans, and they need things we need to talk about on a daily basis. Regina Manyara Gitao is up next with business.